Hey, Ray, I brought you something.
Ooh, are those the last of the holiday cookies?
They are.
Gingerbread are one of my favorite. Now, wait a minute. Are these still okay? It's been a few weeks since the holidays.
Of course, we froze some cookies so they're still good. You trust me, right?
Of course I do. Well, thanks for the cookie.
You know one of the main ingredients in gingerbread cookies, Ray?
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say ginger, sugar. Where are you going with this?
You're right about the ginger and sugar, but I was thinking about molasses, because this week marks a deadly anniversary where 99 years ago this week, molasses killed 21 people in Boston. I'm Jeff Belanger.
And I'm Ray Auger, and welcome to the New England Legends podcast, where each week we cover stories of the unknown, the unusual, or strange bits of history. Okay, Jeff, I actually know a little something about this one. Are we talking about the Boston molasses disaster?
We are, and this is one of those tragedies that sounds kind of funny on the surface. I mean, how could a wave of molasses kill you?
Right, you think about expressions like slow as molasses.
Or slow as molasses in winter, which it was in Boston on January 15th, 1919.
This is one of those disasters that's going to require a little bit of science to fully understand. So let's set this up.
Okay, well, we're at the former site of the Purity Distilling Company in Boston's North End. You need to understand that molasses was a vital commodity. You could distill it to make rum for drinking, ethanol for fuel, and it was also used to make industrial alcohol for munitions. So just 2 months before this disaster, World War I reached an armistice in Europe. This factory had been running at full capacity for years to keep up with global demand.
That demand is part of the problem. When you have crews working long hours, sometimes corners are cut and safety measures are thrown into the wind. This is where problem number one begins when it comes to this disaster.
We're talking about the storage tank.
Yeah, the storage tank. This tank was quickly assembled less than 4 years earlier during the height of World War I. It was 50 feet tall, 90 feet across, and painted bright blue. It was capable of holding 2.5 million gallons of molasses.
Why is the color important?
Well, the color is important because shortly after molasses was placed in the tank, workers noticed brownish-red stains that formed into drips at some of the seams.
So it's already leaking.
It is. There were stories of workers using jars and thermoses to collect some of the dripping molasses to take home to their own kitchens.
So did they fix the leaks?
No. The Purity Distilling Company cut another corner, breaching further trust with workers and the public when it comes to safety. Instead of building a better tank, which would have been expensive, they painted the tank the same color as molasses to camouflage the leaks. But at least now it didn't look so unsightly.
So what went wrong?
Well, this is where we need science.
All right, I'm ready.
On the days leading up to January 15th, 1919, it had been really cold.
But molasses doesn't freeze. Because of all the sugar, it would act like something like an antifreeze.
Well, that's right. Its freezing point is much lower than water. But at low temperatures, the sugar can separate from the water inside, which leaves the sugar behind like an almost sweet cement. Plus, the cooler it is, the less viscous molasses will be.
A few days before January 15th, the Purity Distilling Company filled this tank to near capacity for the first time with 2.3 million gallons of Puerto Rican molasses. The low temperatures helped to hold the whole tank together for a bit.
But on January 15th, the weather changed, and temperatures rose into the 40s.
Cold contracts, heat expands.
All right, so picture this. It was just after noon on Wednesday, January 15th, 1919, when witnesses described what sounded like gunfire coming from the area. What they heard were rivets from this massive tank firing off like bullets moments before the steel sides ripped open, spilling 26 million pounds of molasses flooding down Commercial Street in Boston. Witnesses heard an explosion and then a loud whooshing sound.
The wave of molasses was 15 feet high and moving at an estimated speed of 35 miles per hour. Buildings in the path of the wave were ripped from their foundations, and the molasses snapped the steel support girders from the elevated train track.
Anyone caught in the path of this wave didn't stand a chance. You can't run 35 miles per hour. 21 people were either crushed by the wave and the debris, or they drowned in the brown, sticky goo. The wave created a half-mile path of destruction in Boston.
150 more people were injured. Police and rescue crews arrived quickly, but there's only so much that can be done. I mean, imagine the horror of watching someone struggle for life less than 30 feet away from you. But it's not like you can just jog over and help them. The molasses was waist deep in places. There's just no easy way in.
The aftermath was devastating. Beyond the human toll, there were an estimated $100 million in damages in today's dollars. You have to understand how the molasses would have traveled into drainage systems and all over the city via people's shoes. It was an absolute catastrophe.
Ray, look at this photo from the aftermath. Tell me what you see.
Wow. I mean, like buildings are toppled over and buried in molasses, and the whole area is just a mess. It's a scary picture.
It looks like a bomb went off.
We should mention that if you go to our website, ournewenglandlegends.com, you can see photos of the disaster. Just click on this episode.
And the worst part of this tragedy is that it could have been avoided.
What I don't understand is, given the big demand for molasses during this time period, that usually means big profits. Why rush the construction of something so important as a storage tank that would hold 2.5 million gallons of your company's bread and butter?
Though I can't cite exact reasons, Ray, I do have an idea.
All right, I'm listening.
Every story, every legend has to be placed in the context of its time. Though the Boston molasses disaster is a real event, it's reached legendary status because of how many times the story has been told and retold. Let's go back and look at what was going on in 1919. We already mentioned World War I was in full operation, so that was a big cause for the rushed construction in 1915. But there's a second reason. In the United States, views on alcoholic beverages were turning sour.
Ah, of course, Prohibition. But Prohibition didn't start until January 17th, 1920.
How did you know that exact date, Ray?
It's one of those sad anniversaries I can't get out of my head. Plus, I wrote it down.
Okay, I got it. While it's true that Prohibition was still a year away nationwide, many voices in the temperance movement had been chipping away at this for years. On December 18, 1917, the U.S. Senate proposed the 18th Amendment, which would ban alcoholic beverages in the United States. Back then, it didn't have the support to pass, but that doesn't mean it went away forever.
I guess nothing that big happens overnight.
No, it doesn't. There were brewers, winemakers, and distillers across the country lobbying to keep their industries alive. On November 18, 1918, Congress passed the Temporary Wartime Prohibition Act, which made it illegal to sell alcoholic beverages with an alcohol content greater than 1.28%.
1.28%?
I know, that's even less than that beer you currently drink, if you could believe that.
Talk about light beer. I'm not sure 1.28% even counts. And I guess that rules out all wines and any distilled spirits from brandy to whiskey, vodka, you name it.
That it does. In short, the Purity Distilling Company knew their days were numbered. The war can't last forever, and soon alcohol may be banned in the United States. Why invest heavily in a storage tank that may only be of use to you for a few years at best?
Make all the money you can before the laws change. Ugh, so sad, but, it makes sense.
There were still applications for industrial alcohols and solvents, but getting those big government contracts was then, just like it is now, who you knew and who you could pay off. The Purity Distilling Company must not have felt very good about their chances.
All of these factors made for a disastrous cocktail.
Ray, read this headline from the January 19th, 1919 Boston Post newspaper.
Well, it says, huge molasses tank explodes in North End. 11 dead, 50 hurt.
Of course, we'd later learn the number of dead were actually 21 and injured 150. But read this other headline right on the side of the article, still on the front page, and above the fold for you old-timers like us who know what that means.
Well, this one says, 35 states on dry law list. Amendment ratified by 5 yesterday. 1 more needed. Predict nation dry July 1st. Oh, man, this disaster was yet another card for the temperance movement to play. This is one of those issues I struggle with in our podcast, Jeff. Is it right to bring up old tragedies from so long ago? I mean, people died.
I totally understand that perspective, but I think it's important to retell these stories because this is our history. The Boston molasses disaster is an example of what happens when a company puts greed and profit before safety. There's a breach of trust with employees and the public. Things like this still happen today. A manufacturer might cut a corner and release a product that isn't safe, or a food producer might add a dangerous additive to their products. We hear these headlines all the time.
I get that. I mean, those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it.
Every story, every legend has something to teach us today. When it comes to Boston's molasses disaster, the moral is, greed can kill.
You can subscribe to the New England Legends podcast for free on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Plus, you can visit our website at ournewenglandlegends.com to see photos, comment on specific episodes, and email us about stories you'd like to hear about.
And do us a favor and tell others. Post a review on iTunes and help spread the word about New England Legends. Nothing is better than when people come together around stories.
Until next time, remember, the bizarre is closer than you think.